Muy buenas tardes a todas las personas conectadas al Foro 2020 Asobolsa BBC. Este año, por primera vez, de forma virtual. Hoy queremos motivarlos a través de esta charla para que identifiquemos el potencial de los negocios en la actualidad y hacia el futuro. Sin duda, el COVID nos cambió la forma de interactuar y esto es solo el principio de una nueva revolución. La pregunta es si lo hemos visualizado y si estamos preparados para esto. En el foro Asobolsa BBC también tendremos un invitado muy especial que brindará su conferencia en inglés. Por esta razón, habrá una transmisión en simultáneo con traducción al español para los que prefieran conectarse en ese link y el cual podrán encontrar a través de este chat. Una vez culmine la charla, pueden enviar sus preguntas relacionadas a la conferencia en español o en inglés al chat de este evento. Y para mantenernos conectados durante el evento, los invito a interactuar con el hashtag Foro Asobolsa BBC 2020 a través de sus redes sociales y cuéntenos desde dónde se encuentran sintonizando el evento y qué sector representa. Para dar inicio a este evento, invito a los anfitriones del Foro 2020 Asobolsa BBC, Jaime Humberto López, presidente de Asobolsa, y Juan Pablo Córdoba, presidente de la Bolsa de Valores de Colombia. Bienvenidos.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Saludamos con mucho entusiasmo a las más de 2.000 personas conectadas de varias ciudades de Colombia. Y lo más importante, de todos los sectores, entidades del gobierno, sector financiero, estudiantes, profesores, emprendedores, sector salud, gremios, entre otros muchos. Demostración clara de que todos podemos hacer parte del mercado de capitales, que acá hay oportunidades para todos y que todos son bienvenidos. Los invitamos a ser parte de esta reactivación que Colombia necesitará. Hace años que la Bolsa de Valores de Colombia y Asobolsa hemos venido celebrando un encuentro anual, o sea, nuestro tradicional congreso. Por las dificultades, por todos bien conocidas, este año no fue posible. Por lo tanto, quisimos, a través del foro de hoy, reunir a nuestros amigos alrededor de un tema que estamos seguros será de su mayor interés y actualidad. Como siempre, hemos querido hacerlo con un speaker de lujo, que nos ayude a visualizar el panorama más allá de esta coyuntura, que sin duda nos ha cambiado la forma de trabajar y, por qué no, de vivir. En particular, en el año 2020, el reto ha sido enorme, pero de lo que sí estamos muy orgullosos es de que nuestra industria ha respondido desde el primer momento a las necesidades del país, ese desafío grande que las circunstancias nos han puesto al frente. La bolsa y todo su entorno se movilizó rápidamente y para eso invito al doctor Juan Pablo que nos cuente qué ha hecho la bolsa.
Bueno, doctor Jaime, no, pues en primer lugar, como usted acaba de decir, pues muy contentos de estar en este foro y no perder la tradición, que ya tenemos varios años realizando este foro todos los años para congregar a las personas que están interesadas en el mercado de capitales y a pesar de que no nos lo podíamos hacer personalmente, pues poderlo hacer virtualmente y tener esta oportunidad para conversar y conectarnos todos en pro del desarrollo del mercado de capitales, que creo que ha sido extraordinario. Yo quisiera empezar, Jaime, por decirte que a mí me parece que a pesar de las dificultades, a pesar de los retos que nos ha impuesto el COVID, la verdad, este ha sido un gran año para el país y para el mercado de capitales en lo que tiene que ver en la madurez y el avance del mercado de capitales y de toda la industria, digamos, bursátil y financiera. Yo creo que el primer mensaje es, y que quizás la gente no valora tanto, pero es los mercados han estado abiertos todo el tiempo. O sea, los mercados no han tenido ninguna interrupción. Y adicionalmente yo creo que se dio un paso muy importante en el entendimiento de por qué era importante que los mercados de capitales se mantuvieran abiertos, los mercados financieros se mantuvieran abiertos. Yo creo que la gente, todo el mundo tiene en la cabeza que debe tener acceso a su cuenta corriente, pero no conecta que el que pueda tener acceso a mi cuenta corriente, al dinero que tengo en mi cuenta corriente, mi cuenta de ahorros, requiere que haya un mercado de capitales detrás donde las entidades financieras puedan mover los dineros para que eso pueda suceder. Entonces yo creo que logramos en una coyuntura muy difícil y en muy poco tiempo dar esa conversación y darle un mensaje de tranquilidad al país diciendo los mercados financieros se mantienen abiertos, es muy importante que se mantengan abiertos y que ojalá en las próximas situaciones que se presenten a futuro, que ojalá pues no sean como esta, pero no haya esa discusión de que es mejor de pronto cerrar los mercados financieros cuando suceden eventos extremos. Entonces yo creo que ese, por ejemplo, es un gran aprendizaje. Y por otro lado yo quisiera, de la mano de eso, hacer un reconocimiento a todos los participantes del mercado. Yo creo que, de nuevo, en muy poco tiempo, en muy pocos días, si se quiere, toda la industria financiera se movió a trabajar desde la casa. O sea, esto fue realmente extraordinario y es un gran logro para la industria. Y ahí reconocer, pues obviamente a las firmas de bolsa, pero a los bancos, a las fiduciarias, a los inversionistas institucionales, a los emisores y un reconocimiento muy especial, yo diría, a la superintendencia financiera, porque es que también hubo mucha colaboración y mucha disposición desde la superintendencia financiera. Uno, para apoyar el concepto de que los mercados financieros se mantenían abiertos y dos, para adecuarse a una nueva realidad que nadie estaba esperando y que todos pudiéramos operar remotamente desde casa. O sea que realmente en lo fundamental me parece que ha sido un año de mucho aprendizaje y de un mensaje de mucha tranquilidad para el país.
De acuerdo, Juan Pablo. Yo creo que vale la pena mencionar también la actitud positiva del Banco de la República, que nos dio la mano en un momento difícil y creo que eso fue un factor determinante para el resultado que estamos obteniendo. Y muchas otras entidades. Es increíble pensar que en medio de esta crisis hayamos hecho transformaciones, digamos, de la operación nuestra. Lo que sucedió con la Cámara Riesgo Central de Contraparte en medio de esta dificultad, yo creo que fue una actitud, digamos, de parte de ellos y de parte nuestra muy positiva, no vencernos, sino por el contrario, aprovechar el momento. De modo que yo también me uno a los agradecimientos y a la exaltación, digamos, como felicitación grande a todas esas entidades que nos han dado la mano y han permitido que el crecimiento siga por el rumbo que ya está trazado. Y aquí quiero hacer una recomendación muy importante para todos aquellos que no están listados, que la Bolsa de Valores ofrece, obviamente, a través del listamiento o del listado de cada uno de ustedes, la posibilidad de buscar recursos que el país va a necesitar en su reactivación necesariamente.
Oh, de acuerdo, doctor Jaime. Creo que pues, proyectos como el de la Cámara de Riesgo Central de Contraparte, que no solamente es vincular, digamos, este elemento que genera mayor seguridad para las transacciones en el mercado de acciones, sino que además Colombia adoptó el estándar internacional de moverse en la liquidación al plazo de temas 2 en vez de temas 3, pues es un hito muy importante que usted lo conoce bien desde el punto de vista de la calificación y elegibilidad del mercado de capitales colombiano, en particular del mercado de acciones. Ya hoy Colombia está en el estándar que esperan estas entidades que califican a los mercados internacionales. Colombia está en ese estándar y eso se hizo con el esfuerzo y compromiso de toda la industria, como usted menciona, y ahí pues un agradecimiento a las firmas de bolsa que acompañaron ese proceso. Pero volviendo al tema general que usted menciona, o sea, la intervención del Banco de la República muy oportuna para irrigar liquidez, eso también eso es un activo de este país, o sea, que tengamos un banco central, unas entidades regulatorias y de supervisión que entienden las situaciones del mercado y que actúan con rapidez y con celeridad dando soluciones, es un activo extraordinario para el país. De nuevo, yo creo que la gente no lo valora y no lo entiende tanto, pero es extraordinario porque eso es lo que permite que la máquina continúe andando. Y gracias a ese movimiento rápido también los mercados se calmaron. Y yo creo que hay un hito muy importante para celebrar, Jaime, es la reapertura del mercado de bonos. Usted recordará que a finales de marzo, principios de abril, estábamos en shock y nadie se atrevía a lanzarse al mercado. Finalmente logramos trabajar con Celsia primero y luego con Credit Familia para que se lanzaran con emisores que ya son conocidos en el mercado y que no tenían que abrir trocha tan duro, volver a hacer una emisión, pero en este caso una emisión 100% remota. Todos estábamos aprendiendo. Todo el mundo estaba acostumbrado a hacer una emisión, sí digitalmente, pero desde los sitios de trabajo. Esto es desde la casa. Y fueron supremamente exitosas esas emisiones. Se reabrió el mercado y se generó la confianza. Y fíjense, Jaime, llevamos ya 10 billones de pesos emitidos en el mercado este año. O sea que vamos muy posiblemente a superar el récord del año pasado en términos de emisiones, lo cual es extraordinario como señal de lo que usted está diciendo. El mercado de capitales está aquí abierto para ayudar a la financiación de las empresas colombianas. estamos demostrando que a pesar de este, digamos, confinamiento, el mercado continuó abierto y continuó funcionando. Y una gran noticia, adicionalmente en los programas de gobierno, se extendió, digamos, las garantías del Fondo Nacional de Garantías a las emisiones de bonos en el mercado de capitales. Así que yo creo que hay muy buenos elementos y como usted dice, pues lo que tenemos aquí es el mensaje desde el mercado de capitales de que podemos ser parte de la solución y que debemos ser parte de la solución en términos de la reactivación económica, y creo que los inversionistas institucionales y todos los participantes del mercado estamos listos a apoyar a las empresas para la siguiente etapa de recuperación.
Muy bien, entonces yo creo que nuevamente agradeciéndole a toda la audiencia, que es vasta y es importante, damos entonces paso, Karen, al próximo punto. Muchas gracias, Juan, encantado de saludarte.
Un placer.
Muchísimas gracias por su intervención, Jaime y Juan Pablo. Recuerden a todas las personas que están conectadas, pueden enviar sus preguntas, tanto en español como en inglés, a través de este chat para que sean respondidas por el conferencista en el panel de preguntas. Y ahora quisiera dejarlos con los presidentes de las sociedades comisionistas, que con su patrocinio ayudaron a que esta conferencia la pudiéramos traer a todos ustedes de manera 100% gratuita, compartiendo el conocimiento experto con nuestra comunidad. Ellos son María Teresa Uribe, presidenta de Da Vivienda Corredores, y Luis Fernando Pandiño, presidente de Alianza Valores. Bienvenidos, Luis Fernando y María Teresa.
Gracias, Karen. Pues primero en nombre de Alianza y especialmente de Alianza Valores quiero expresarles mis agradecimientos por haber aceptado la invitación de la Bolsa, de Asobolsa y de la Bolsa de Valores de Colombia. Bueno, nuestro conferencista el día de hoy es el presidente de la Junta Directiva de la Asociación Fintech de Hong Kong, es socio de Price, autor del bestseller The Future Finance y sin lugar a dudas una celebridad en las redes sociales. Henri ha estudiado de manera sistemática y profunda las últimas megatendencias que están teniendo lugar en los ecosistemas de tecnología financiera, criptomonedas e inteligencia artificial, con una perspectiva global, con ejemplos muy prácticos y, como él mismo dice, energizantes. María Teresa.
Gracias, Luis Fernando. Este año el COVID-19 nos cambió el mundo, y para hablarnos de cómo esto impactará la manera de hacer negocios, qué debemos hacer para adaptarnos, renovarnos y continuar vigentes y seguir construyendo un mercado de capitales robusto, los quiero dejar entonces con Henri Arslanian. Welcome to Colombia, Henri.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por invitarme y por esa buena bienvenida. Bueno, primero que todo, estoy muy emocionado de estar con todos ustedes de manera virtual. Yo recuerdo que hace 3 años estuve allá, y lo que más recuerdo no es solamente la gente tan querida, la comida tan deliciosa, pero lo que no puedo olvidar es la hospitalidad colombiana. Muchas gracias por eso y espero volver a estar con ustedes. Durante los próximos minutos, lo que quiero hacer es muy sencillo. Quiero compartir con todos ustedes las grandes ideas que estamos viendo hoy cuando se trata del futuro del dinero.
Some of them you may disagree. Some you may think
estas
are
no
great
con
ideas.
otras.
Some you may think are completely stupid. But I think the point is actually that I'm able to share. And my goal is then let you make your own decision based on hopefully with this information on what you think the fit with what's happening with the global situation. It is difficult times, and there was no shortage of that this year, from the economic crisis to what's happening globally right now. But really, my message to you all today, despite all these difficulties, this is one of the most exciting times in the history of finance, one of the most exciting times in the history of money. And while we have a lot of these challenges, they bring about a lot of new opportunities. And we'll have a chance to discuss many of these today. But before I always do, I give another warning. You know, this is the warning. I thank you for the introduction. I was introduced as an expert in the topic, but I'll give you one warning. Is if anybody tells you they are an expert in the future of finance or the future of money, you have to run away. I can tell you I spend 24/7 of my time in the space, in the fintech space, in the digital asset space. And I can tell you honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen 1 month from now. The reason, things move very, very, very fast in this space. And they're moving even faster. It's a bit like dog years. A day in this world is like 7 days in a normal world. Things move ridiculously fast. And I'll talk about it today just to give you an example. In the last 24 hours, there were developments in the digital asset space that have completely changed the game. So a great example of how things move fast. But really the point I want to drive is that actually COVID-19, the coronavirus, has had an irreversible impact on the future of money. Whether we like it or we don't, that is the situation. And the benefit that it provides is that actually anybody in financial institutions, whether we're brokerages, whether we're in any different element of the financial world, we need to understand these, to anticipate the challenges that are coming in, and most importantly, to capture some of the opportunities that it presents. And to do this, over the next couple of minutes, we're going to go on a journey together. And I'm going to cover 4 developments. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Share them with you, and then we can make a decision on where do you think the impact could be. I'll talk about crypto assets and the impact they're having. I'll talk about stable coins, especially in the area with the countries where there's a lot of remittance and a lot of international trade going on. We'll talk about central bank digital currencies and the impact they have and what's happening right now, especially in Asia, and the opportunities that maybe we have to look at Asia instead of Silicon Valley to see where the future is going. And of course on tokenization and some of the benefits that it can provide to the brokerages and what we are seeing right now take place around the world. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of fun from that perspective and discuss some of them. Let me start right now. Let's jump right in with when it comes with crypto assets. But before that, we have to go a quick history of money. Like anything else we do, it's always very important to look at the past as well. When we talk about money, and if I put my professor hat on for a couple of seconds, there's really these 3 characteristics that we always look at. Generally, for what we think about money, it needs to be store of value. We believe it's going to keep its value, a medium of exchange, something people are happy to be able to use, and a unit of account in which we can measure the price of goods that we're buying. And this definition has changed over the years and the centuries. Back in the day, it was cattle. People would give the cow in exchange of certain goods. For a long time, we were using shells. Actually, until only maybe 150, 200 years ago, in many parts around the world, cowrie shells were still quite relatively well used. We have then the first coins that came out in the Lydian Empire, in what is modern-day Turkey. Well, obviously things evolved, and then emperors decided it's a good idea to put their face on money and be able to literally create money as we know it. Things have evolved slowly since then as well. Leather money was one of the first, before we even had paper currency, came out in China. To obviously then paper currency, another great invention from the Chinese at a time that actually started the whole trend of paper currencies that would follow for the centuries to come. Wampums, with a lot of Native American tribes, were being used until very not so long ago. In many parts of North America, for example, these were used as what we call a store of value and as a medium of exchange. But you may say this is all old history. Well, you look at what happening about in the last 200 years. The first US dollar that came in. Fun fact, the reason it's actually the greenback, the dollar is actually green, because at a time they thought it would be very difficult to actually be able to copy something in color. Then, obviously, the dollar evolved, the end of the gold standard in the 1970s, and which brings up to the late 2000s with digital payments. But really where we're starting seeing a lot of big change, rapid change, that has impacted all of these elements is obviously what we saw with the rise of crypto assets. And this is important to understand when we talk about this topic. What is the problem that crypto assets are trying to solve? The big problem is double spending. Today, if I give you a $1 note, you can take it, you can take a look at it. If you don't think it's a fake, it's a real one, you have it. And this works great when we're doing this in an analog world. The problem happens when we try to move digitally. If I take a picture of my $5 note and I try to send you by WhatsApp or by email, it's great. But nothing stops me from sending the same picture to many different people. And this is what we call the big problem that we've had for many years, the double spend problem. Is that as we move to digital, how can we stop people from being able to spend the same money twice? So we came up with, obviously, a lot of people tried to solve this problem. The way we've been doing it is via traditional intermediaries, banks, financial institutions who stay in the middle and make sure that this does not happen. But a lot of people have been discussing the last 20, 30 years, is there a better way of doing this? Maybe a more efficient way. There's been numerous attempts in the 80s and the 90s, but it didn't get a lot of traction. And all this happened, then the change happened exactly 12 years ago when the financial crisis happened. You know, on September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And only 6 weeks later, literally on Halloween Day, actually 10 days from now, we'll be celebrating its birthday, this paper was published on the internet by a gentleman, by a woman, by a group of people called Satoshi Nakamoto. By the way, to this day, we don't know who he or she or they are. They had this very interesting idea that actually, how can we have a way to transmit money peer-to-peer without going through a financial institution? And what this paper actually, the idea was, okay, today we're having everything is centralized, but is there a way to do things in a decentralized way? And this is how a blockchain was created. Fun fact, by the way, in that initial paper from Satoshi Nakamoto that I just mentioned, the word blockchain is never mentioned. They talk about chains of blocks, blocks of chain, but they never use the word blockchain. The word blockchain was actually popularized by The Economist, the magazine, and Bloomberg magazine in about 2015. So very interesting fun fact from that perspective. So this is a bit of the background to what happened. But what was also very interesting is a lot of this, while today, a lot of the financial transactions that happen around the world are very private, what this new model using blockchain technology did was very different. All transactions are public. Today, if somebody sends on a Bitcoin blockchain a transaction, everybody can see it. The wallet number is there. You know who sent it, who received it. You don't know who's behind, but you know exactly what transaction took place. The monetary policy was very clear. Every 10 minutes, a set number of cryptocurrencies would be created. Very clearly. There couldn't be any quantitative easing. There would not be any ability to print money as we've seen over the last couple of months and weeks at record levels around the world. The other thing they try to do as well was to kind of destroy the monopoly of all the big four accounting firms, all the auditors, that actually enabling anybody with basic internet access in a computer, at least originally, to kind of become an auditor and verify transactions, because it was based on mathematics and rather than being done by a set of standards and professional bodies. And I can come back to all these things later on. But what's really interesting to note is all these developments I was just talking took place initially with the goal to seeing if there's any change in how we can reinvent the model. Initially, it never got any traction. You know, just to give an example, in 2010, this had no value. The one famous transaction, the first time a value was put on digital assets like crypto assets, you know, was a transaction where somebody bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. You may say, well, at the time it was useless. Well, those 2 pizzas now are worth over $100 million today. But again, at a time, these assets were completely useless. Nobody thought there was any value. And over the last 10 years, we have seen this industry completely shift. And now, obviously, it's a massive ecosystem that is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Over 100 million people are using it on a regular basis. But all these changes were moving and moving until COVID happened. while this whole crypto asset space was moving gradually, slowly, moving forward, COVID really acted as a catalyst to the entire crypto assets ecosystem. For example, over the last couple of months, we've been seeing record levels of interest. This is globally, by the public, by the academic world, by the policymakers on this topic. I'll give you guys some practical examples later on, but some of them is driven, by the record levels of quantitative easing that we are seeing around the world, where a lot of printing of money is taking place. And people are actually asking the question more of what is money, how is money created, what is the purpose of money? But also what's really interesting when you're thinking about this, we see very clear difference, interest, but especially younger people. It's very interesting. Many countries you ask around the world, and I also see it with my students at the universities. It's very incredible how the group of people, the most interested on this topic of the future of money and digital assets more broadly, tend to be a lot of the young people. And it's been very interesting to see how this actual generational gap is taking place. Just even give you an example, in certain countries right now, data showing us that a lot of millennials are more likely to even own crypto assets than even stocks. So very interesting developments. But this is all good. It's all very interesting. The question brings, what are the opportunities for traditional financial institutions in this space? Especially when you consider that in many countries, including Colombia, there's regulatory frameworks may not be very clear. In many places, we're not sure how to move forward with it. The question is, what is taking place around the world that we can take a look at with what's happening by financial institutions, and what are some of the lessons we can learn from this? For example, one thing we can look at globally is that when you look at this topic, really the entire ecosystem is growing tremendously. For the last couple of years, companies have been created in the space that did not exist before. And whereas a lot of the developments in the digital asset space in the early days were being developed by financial institutions. And because the industry is evolving. I'll give you a very simple example, custody. How people actually store digital assets. In the same way that stocks are stored with custodians, the same problem arises ironically with digital assets. In the early days, you would be seeing a lot of people self-custody, keeping it in themselves in kind of little USB drive type of tools that were available to move things becoming regulated to now actually a lot of financial institutions entering the space and offering such services to the industry. You're even seeing whole derivatives market even develop on the whole asset class. Initially it was unregulated, and now you're seeing a lot of the big regulated players enter the space as well. And even the players in the space are becoming increasingly institutionalized. Many of them getting the same levels of certification, audits, checks, cybersecurity checks that you see the traditional financial institutions have in place. But also regulating compliance. In a couple of years ago, this industry was not regulated. It was very under the radar. There was risks of money laundering and lack of KYC, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But right now, there's a big trend going on with all the exchanges and all these transactions being actually verified. In the same way banking transactions are able, we have KYC, we know who's transacting, the same thing is happening on this industry. AML, anti-money laundering and sanction verifications. Whoever thought that this whole digital asset space was beyond this, actually what we see now is that you complete the same set of regulations that we have in AML, sanction monitoring and everything, apply exactly to the same industry as well, and is being even more enforced. And one of the big benefits as well is that you're able to see all these transactions. So every transaction that is taking place right now on Bitcoin, for example, is publicly verifiable, and in many cases makes it easier for law enforcement to verify. But also we're seeing the players in the ecosystem become increasingly institutionalized. For example, now, I would argue that many of the large crypto digital assets players in the world right now have in many cases better KYC and AML than a lot of traditional financial players. Why is that? That is because they're able to leverage the latest law tech, reg tech, regulatory technology, legal technology solutions, and they do not have any legacy systems. So they're able to actually use the latest technology when it comes to artificial intelligence, biometrics, and so on and so forth, to be able to actually identify their users and be able to remain compliant with the law. And this brings to a very important point. Again, if I put my lawyer hat on for a second, is the really what we have seen the last couple of years with when it comes to regulatory clarity as well. Around the world right now, we are seeing a massive drive of trying to provide clarity and enforcement in the space. For example, today only 5% of regulators in the world don't have a team working on crypto assets regulations, for example, according to Cambridge University. We're having tax clarity even right now. Many countries trying to see how can we actually look at properly taxing such a new asset class that is taking place. For example, for the first time this year, in the United States, the IRS is asking every single citizen whether they have owned any virtual currency in the past year. We're seeing now countries increasingly come up with tax guidance on this topic and try to provide clarity on this asset class. And all this to say, this is why when many people believe, these digital assets are going to go away, they're just a little trend, we should just forget about it. The fact that these assets now are being taxed, are being part of the fiscal policy, shows that this asset class is here to stay. And this is why also it's catalyzing the entry of a lot of institutional players, a lot of financial institutions in this space as well. Over the last couple, 2 to 3 years, we're seeing a number of players, from brokerages to custodians, to even investment banks, retail banks, wealth managers enter the space to try to provide services to not only institutional clients, but also to the broader public as well. For example, you're having some financial institutions invest, saying, well, actually, we don't know the space very well, but why don't we actually invest in some of these companies and see what actually slowly how we can learn from it. Others are partnering with it, are partnering with some firms to try to provide a solution. A great example of that was Nomura, the Japanese investment bank, where they have a lot of traditional institutional clients, but they do not have experience when it comes to digital assets. What they did, they partnered with a French firm called Ledger, and they came out an offering where Nomura has the clients, the traditional clients, and a company like Ledger has a crypto and digital assets expertise, and together they came up with a solution. Others have been doing in-house initiatives, like JP Morgan, I'll talk about in a second, where they're launching the JP Morgan coin. And other financial institutions have said, you know what, we are not able to innovate fast enough in our organization. What we should do is set up a new entity on the side where we can hire young people, more different thinking, where they're not siloed within the organization, where they can focus on this asset. Fidelity is a great example. And all this was helped as well by some of the regulations that were coming in. And many, you're seeing now a lot of the banks being allowed to hold some of these assets. Some of the banks who are very critical of it, like JP Morgan and others, now actually openly providing services. There's the Winklevoss twins, by the way, for those who remember from the Facebook days, and now actually are very active in the crypto space. And like many financial institutions now actually launching their own coins. And this is actually something they've been looking a lot when it comes to the technology players, especially what's happening in Asia. For example, a lot of financial institutions are thinking, saying, well, instead of me just becoming a bank, why don't I try to become a platform? For example, JP Morgan is thinking of launching a JP Morgan coin, where when a client deposits, let's say $1 in their account, they could have a $1 JP Morgan coin, and then two clients of the bank, instead of using the traditional SWIFT or traditional payment rails, they can send each other the same JP Morgan coin, basically bypassing the existing rails, but actually making the bank kind of financial ecosystem, a bit like the big apps that you see on your smartphones. So a lot of these developments that have been taking place. So often the big questions that have been going on right now is, can this be an opportunity for financial institutions? Did COVID accelerate this trend? Is this something worth looking at? Maybe it's something worth looking at. Maybe you think, oh, this is something that's way too far. We don't need to worry about it today. Well, this, I agree, crypto assets may be a bit further down the line, but there's other developments that are even closer. Let me go through stablecoins. First of all, what is a stablecoin? Stablecoin is a digital currency that is backed one-to-one by fiat currency. So for example, when we talk about, let's say, Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin is just pure offer and demand. There's a lot of volatility in the price of Bitcoin. What is a stablecoin? It's a digital asset that is backed one-to-one, say by US dollar. That means if I send you one stablecoin, it is worth $1 today, it's going to be worth $1 tomorrow and next week and next month. It's basically the ability to send money that is in digital currency format, but that is actually backed by fiat currency. And there's numerous examples of this right now taking place around the world. You know, you have a lot of them that are regulated. You see a lot of them, for example, here I'm giving the US dollar examples. In the US, for example, you're having some that are non-regulated, where actually private companies are providing it, and actually the market has to see if they trust them or not. Tether is a great example that right now trades for over $40 billion of volumes a day, even more than Bitcoin. And you even have some examples, I'm not going to go into it today, but that are fully decentralized. That means that this money, the $1 is backed by pure mathematics without any intermediaries. Now you may say, well, this is great. You know, what's the point of this? You know, are people really using this? Well, especially post-COVID, we've seen record levels of usage. Since March, for example, we have seen a massive acceleration of the usage of stablecoins around the world. Only this summer, the last 3 months, the volume has doubled. Today, it's around just actually even more than $20 billion of stablecoins being used. But you may say, but this is all very good, but why people are even using this? Why would somebody use such a stablecoin? Well, there's a couple of benefits. One of it, it's stable. But second, you can actually, the ability to send money around the world to anybody else for no fee, cross-border fees. For example, I mean, I'm physically right now based in Hong Kong. I had to send money last time to my family in Canada. First of all, my bank doesn't do foreign exchange transactions on a Sunday on my online bank. But actually, when you try to make cross-border payments, there are foreign exchange fees, transaction fees, banking fees, and so on and so forth. With this, you have the ability to send money around the world literally for almost for free, instantaneously, and it works 24/7. This is on a retail sector, but also you're seeing now a lot of people use it on an institutional level as well, and I'll talk about it in a second. But let me give you a very simple example. Remittances, right? Today, the average fee of sending money around the world is 7%. This is the average fee, by the way. In many countries in Latin America and Africa, it's often double digit. And especially for the smaller amounts, the fees are quite high. Over $550 billion is sent around the world by 250 million migrants around the world. I'm sure many of you, including myself, we had to send money via MoneyGram, Western Union, and so on and so forth over the last couple of years. And you all know the fees that were paid in these transactions. Stable coins allow you to send this globally, 24/7, no fees, instantaneously. But what should you pay attention without potentially intermediaries? So think about the business you're in today. Think if you're involved in any kind of remittance business and say, whoa, can this come and actually destroy that entire revenue flow that I have from any kind of cross-border business, from remittance business? Again, this was great. This was moving very slowly, but two big developments happened here. The first one was actually before COVID, was last year, last summer, when Facebook announced Libra in June 2019. And Libra had a very simple goal. Was the goal to move money globally should be as easy and cost effective as sending a text message, a WhatsApp, or sharing a picture. And you think about it. You can send a picture or WhatsApp or an email to anyone around the world in a second for free. Why is doing the same with money more complicated in 2020? There was obviously a lot of pushback to this idea initially. Libra evolved. This summer they came out with a new innovation. They changed some of their ideas. And now actually what Libra is doing is kind of becoming a stable coin. Where Libra, when they launch, they'll be Libra USD, Libra GBP, pretty much any central bank or any currency you want could be on the Libra blockchain. And this means that anybody that has one of the wallets could be able to send money to each other around the world, again, 24/7 for free, instantaneously. And by the way, this is being regulated. This Libra association you're seeing is being regulated in Switzerland. And actually, they're trying to work now with many countries around the world with the goal of solving this remittance issue. But you may say again, this is it's far away. It hasn't been launched yet. Well, what's the impact it can have? Well, things are moving very fast in this space. 24 hours ago, yesterday, PayPal announced that it is now offering Bitcoin and cryptocurrency transactions. Again, initially, if you look at it, it's only for US customers. But again, they're going to expand on this globally over in the next 12 months. And what's really interesting here is that anybody will be able to use that at any merchant. Anywhere in the world, merchants will be able to accept digital crypto assets or stable crypto assets actually without even touching the asset class. Everything happening behind the scenes. So and this is all regulated as well. But again, you may tell me, but we're a brokerage. This is retail. It's not going to affect us. How can it even impact us? We're in the brokerage business. We deal with a lot of corporates. Well, what's happening? We're seeing now increasingly this being used at an international level from corporates. And you know what? One of the regions we're seeing this being used a lot is actually in South America. This year, for example, they've been tracking the data, a lot of the importers and export business, for example. If, let's say, you're Colombia, you're trying to import goods from China, like everybody else does. The whole payments process of letters or credits, the correspondent banking relationships, the financing of these letter credits is quite a cumbersome process. And now we're seeing increasingly is between Asia, Southeast Asia, and actually many parts of the world, including here what you'll see in LATAM, people actually using simply stable coins. The ability to send the money directly, peer-to-peer, without using a lot of the financial systems that are in place. Again, you may say, this is very, very early days. We're only talking about a couple $1 million. How can it impact me? And you're right. But what's interesting is that these numbers now are increasing every month. And actually, the question we should ask ourselves is, can this trend increase? Is this a threat that we may see some of the business go away? Or is this an opportunity? Is this something we should think internally, whether stable coins and other such type of assets is something we should try to get more comfortable with, be more educated on, to see if there's any way we have opportunities on this space. Let me give you another example now. When it comes to central bank digital currencies. Again, today, if you're a central banker today, anywhere in the world, if you're a central banker and you love Bitcoin, you're crazy. This is like a taxi driver being excited to see Uber come in their market, right? Obviously, something like Bitcoin, nobody has any control on. It's fully decentralized. Nobody can even interact. You cannot stop it. But actually, what central banks realized quickly said, hey, wait a second. Maybe I don't like Bitcoin, but there's some features of blockchain technology and digital currencies that I can use myself that can be very beneficial. And this is why we saw the rise of what we call the CBDC, central bank digital currencies. So what is a central bank digital currency? It's a digital form of central bank money that is issued by the central bank, and that is part of the monetary base of that economy. Again, let me put my professor on for a second. Today, there's really two kinds of central bank money in the world. There's cash, physical cash that you hold. that is a liability on the central bank. And the second kind of central bank money that exists are the reserves that your bank holds at the central bank. That's it. The money that I hold, that you hold in a bank, actually is not central bank money. It's actually, debits and credits. It's accounting entries with that financial institution. And this works pretty well. But what central bank money is actually, it could be a third form of central bank money in a digital format. So imagine literally the equivalent of paper banknotes, but in a digital format. And you may say, oh, well, is this going to really happen? Is this really can be discussed? Are really other countries looking at this? Well, what's happening now, actually, a lot of countries are looking at this. And I'll talk about how COVID has become one of the reasons around this. Actually, today, according to the Bank of International Settlements, 80% of central banks are exploring this topic, whether CBDCs is something we should look at it. But things have came a long way as well. If you look at only 2-3 years ago, at the policy-making level, globally, the message was that, no, these things are not good. Today, the system that we have today, the infrastructure that we have today works very well. All these new cryptocurrencies, all this blockchain technology is a poor substitute for the solid institutional backing of money that we have today. It's not even in Europe, there was a lot of concerns with this, saying actually, is this something that we have to actually look at? Because one of the big risks is today, if imagine tomorrow morning, nobody trusts the banks anymore. What you can do, obviously you can try to go on ATM, try to withdraw your money. There's obviously limits of how much you can store and actually how you can physically securely store it. The big difference with a digital currency is you can pretty much put as much as you want in a digital wallet on your phone. There's no limit to it. And this is actually why there was a lot of concerns by a lot of policymakers and central banks that in the event of financial instability, it may accelerate a run on the banks. And imagine a country like Colombia where there's a lot of cash being used, where usage of cash is still very high in the market. And this is why, however, there's a lot of benefits that were being discussed. For example, better visibility of the impact of monetary policy. So imagine today in a country like Colombia where there's a high percentage of transactions being made in cash, the central bank or policymakers have no idea where the money is being used for. If they want to do a certain monetary policy or initiative, you cannot see the impact on the country. However, if you're using a CBDC, a digital version, you can see at a macro level, in an anonymized way, where actually the economic activity is taking place in the country. A second big benefit is try to combat tax evasion and the black economy. Again, if you're in a business today using cash, you don't want to pay tax, you can do all your transactions, cash is the best way. But imagine if we move to a CBDC or a digital format, this enables us to actually have better control and actually not only fight tax evasion, but also some of the black economy. But one of the biggest benefits, something I'm personally spent a lot of time on, is combating money laundering. Again, today, as we all know, one of the biggest problems we have around the world is money laundering. According to the World Bank, you have between anywhere from up to 5% to 7% of global GDP is actually laundered money around the world. In many countries, like a big economy like the United States, billions of dollars are spent every year on money laundering. But despite all these efforts, we're able to capture less than 1% of laundered transactions. CBDCs may not solve all the problems with corruption and money laundering, but at least they give us a fighting chance because we can see the transactions and there's more visibility. But there's also some other benefits we're looking at. One of them is embedding monetary policy in the digital currency. Today, when a central bank wants to actually impact the economy, they will either print money, but actually what happens in practice, they'll buy a lot of the assets. So the central bank can only indirectly affect the monetary policy of the country. Whereas with a CBDC, you could, in theory, embed the interest rate directly in your CBDC wallet. So it really actually gives us a lot of more powers and potentials that didn't exist before. And again, all these discussions were moving forward, things were moving forward slowly. And again, what happened, this got catalyzed by Libra last year, initially. And this really put this conversation on top of the agenda around the world. Politicians got involved. Donald Trump even got pissed off, saying, no. There's not going to be any other currency. Everybody has to use the US dollar. It's the strongest currency in the world. You know, the US government got afraid as well. They even wrote letters to all the CEOs of companies that were involved with Libra, telling them, hey, CEO, if you get involved with Libra, we will investigate your business, not only your Libra business, but all your payment activities. This is why you saw a lot of credit card companies and other public companies had to back off. But also, to be fair, there was also a lot of concerns from policymakers on many of these issues, right? And what are you going to deal with this? For example, one of them was actually it could create a risk of currency substitution. So imagine if, let's say a country like Colombia, if people actually are sending money back and forth, let's say from Colombia to the United States, for example, and back and forth, if it's very easy to use Libra and everybody can using it, it becomes very accepted, why would he start using a local currency when we can start using this global currencies? And this has a risk for many, many countries around the world because there's a risk of currency substitution. But also, there's actually really risk of broader financial stability. Because if people are start just using these stable coins around the world, why would you use a lot of existing systems that exist today? Even we saw bank funding. I mean, think today about how your organization gets funded. When people leave money in a bank, the bank is able to use this money and lend it out for loans and so on and so forth. But imagine if more and more people are just keeping their money in a digital wallet, not keeping it at a bank. This actually affects the amounts of money that the bank has, increases the funding cost of a bank, means the bank has to get funding at a wholesale level and so on and so forth. But all these debates were going on. Again, what changed the conversation? COVID. COVID came in the picture and really changed the game here. One big problem that happened was people didn't want to touch paper money anymore. You know, we were all worried that paper money may actually transmit the virus. So actually, what he called globally, a lot of the bank payments for banknotes came down. But at the same time, you've had actually record levels of cash in the system. Why? And this happens around the world, and any kind of financial instability, people hoard cash, keep cash with them just because of the financial stability. So you have a weird situation. People don't want to use it for payments anymore, but they're keeping a lot of banknotes. And at the same time, you're having another issue is that whenever we're trying to make payments, government support, stimulus, we realize it's actually a problem. Even an advanced, so-called advanced economy like the US had to send 100 million stimulus checks by post because they couldn't get access to the people they want access to. So all this COVID really, again, brought up this whole conversation. You even had in the US Congress discussions about a digital dollar. Is there a way we have to rethink the system? Completely fast-tracked because of COVID. And here I just want to again stop for a minute just to give one bit of conversation that is relevant, especially for those of you who are in the brokerage business. Because there's two kinds of CBDCs right now in the market. First is what we call wholesale CBDC. It's a digital currency that is issued by a central bank that is used only between the central bank and the member banks. So for the retail public, for the students who are listening to you today, or the public, you do not see this CBDC. This only makes the system efficient between the central bank and the member banks. The other type of CBDC is retail CBDC. Is the one that the central bank issues that the public, everyday people, somebody like me, is able to hold. And this is why you're seeing a lot of activity in this space globally. You know, some of them is happening at the country level, for example. People trying to see, should we look at the wholesale CBDC in our country and see whether it's actually merit to look at this. But frankly, while at the national level it's interesting, where we're seeing probably the most use cases for this is at the cross-border level. Seeing actually whether this kind of wholesale CBDC can be useful when two countries are transacting together. Think about, for example, Latin America, different countries transacting together. Is there a way to make those payments more efficient and effective? And again, for many things when it comes to the future of money, a lot of developments are happening in Asia. For example, probably the most advanced activity right now in the space when it comes to banks and central banks is probably what's happening right now in Thailand and Hong Kong, for example, where the central banks are setting up a corridor where basically a business, a bank goes to a central bank, gets a digital version of the money, and that money can be actually exchanged with other banks in the other country directly without any correspondent banking and actually without any of the fees and transaction fees that takes place normally. So again, very interesting development coming up from Asia. But again, when you look at the retail CBDCs as well, there's a lot of exploration going on there as well, on the right side. And there's different models that are being explored around the world. For example, probably the most common case right now is what we call the two-tiered issuance, which is when a central bank issues a digital currency, but does that by the big financial institutions. What this means is that they can issue digital currency and that money actually sent to the public, but actually using the existing financial institutions are in place. Sweden is a good example looking at this, but particularly China. And I'll talk about China in a second that has a lot of interesting things going on. This week, I was mentioning a lot of the big development that took place. The Bahamas, small country in the Caribbean, is now actually officially launched its own central bank digital currency that is being distributed by some of the banks. But then there's different models as well. For example, one of them is a synthetic CBDC. Many would argue in academic circles and policy circles whether it is a real central bank digital currency. It's basically when the central bank gives access to its reserves to a bank, but also to a non-bank fintech, think of like a big tech company that has reserves with the central bank that is able to issue money that is backed one-to-one. The IMF has been really pushing this forward for the last couple of years. And the last model is what we call the platform models, where actually the central bank will set up a technological platform that the banks and non-bank fintechs can actually plug in. Again, a lot of developments there are happening on the UK side, for example. But for all these things you are looking, you really need to look, many cases, at what's happening in Asia, especially China. Make no mistake, China, when it comes to fintech, is about 4 to 5 years ahead of the rest of the world. I often say to the bank CEOs, if you want to look at what's happening in the future of finance, you should not be going to Silicon Valley. You should instead go to Beijing or to Shenzhen. China has been experimenting this for many years. They started researching this topic in 2014, 7 years ago, when nobody else was looking at this. And now China is pretty much cashless. Nobody's using pretty much cash anymore. And they're looking at replacing the digital money that people have on their digital wallets with tech firms or apps and move it completely to a central bank digital currency. And now actually they've been launching official pilots. And just last week, they've announced they've done over $160 million in a pilot with over 6,700 use cases and 110,000 wallets opened. So this is literally what we call the future of money is taking place in front of our eyes. And once again, this was catalyzed by COVID. I'm happy to bet that this would have not moved so quickly if the whole COVID situation didn't happen. And actually, they've become quite innovative. Last weekend, they even launched a lottery. The government launched a lottery where they gave 50,000 people $30 US equivalent in central bank digital money. 50 million people participated, and the people were able to use CBDC for the first time. So this is not science fiction. This is not something we're seeing in books. This is not something we're discussing professors at academic conferences. This is something we are seeing live right now take place in one of the biggest economies in the world. So I bring it back to the initial question. Can CBDC provide opportunities for financial institutions? Is this something we need to look at? Is that something we need to be educated about and think about? And last point I'll finish it up with is tokenization. It's really something that affects a lot of what we look at something that can provide a lot of direct opportunities now for any banks and financial institutions. First of all, what is tokenization? Tokenization really consists of issuing digital tokens on a blockchain where each token represents an underlying real-life asset. Let me give you a very simple example. Today, if I want to buy a building in Bogota, it's great, but unless I have the money to buy that entire building in Bogota, I don't have the money for a down payment. I cannot just go buy it. The beauty of tokenization is I can take that big building in Bogota, separate it into 10,000 pieces, and be able to actually sell that little chunk of it to individuals who want to acquire it. What it does actually for a lot of for financial institutions, increases the potential client pool, and also offers the ability to offer assets that are not possible today. For example, we're seeing right now people try to tokenize paintings, art. You know, we've seen the last couple of weeks people try to tokenize Picasso's, Andy Warhol, artist paintings. Or maybe I cannot go buy a Picasso myself, but I can buy 1/1000 of that painting and actually be able to have economic exposure to that asset. The other thing you would say is actually allows us to actually allow to do this, and actually in a significant reduction of the cost to it as well. While in many countries right now, you're seeing people do REITs, do real estate investment trusts, try to provide tokenized assets to real estate, for example. In this way, you're able to do it very effectively and very quickly in very low cost, basically tokenizing pretty much any asset that you want. So again, it allows you to take a big chunk of asset, tokenize into little pieces, and be able to offer it. And actually, this has a lot of operational benefits as well. Think about our industries and financial services, how much money and time is spent in middle and back office operations. How much time is spent doing corporate actions whenever there's shareholders voting. In a tokenized world on a blockchain, you know exactly who your shareholders are all times. All times. You could even move from an annual dividend to quarterly dividend. You could move to daily or hourly dividend if you want to, because you have technology enables to do that. And this was over the last couple of months, we've been seeing a lot of in the tokenization projects. We've seen actually quite a few in Brazil, where companies looking at seeing how they can actually tokenize real estate in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, government assets. And it's something we're seeing around the world. People try to see, especially brokerages, seeing as if something where we can actually expand our business in a lot of the changes going on and actually start to offer new asset classes to a new chunk of clients, but also a new type of asset class that we have. And I'll wrap it up really with this. Obviously, there's been this 4 developments that I just shared with you all. You may think some of them are crazy. Some may think may not be applicable. You may think, we're still very far from these. Maybe some of them you're like, wow, this is actually, I didn't know this was happening today. But this is why I often say with these 4 examples, you need to think about it. You need to be aware of these changes going on. And also in the back of your mind, think about it. Okay, in the event some of these developments are going to take place, am I ready to deal with them? Is this a challenge or it's an opportunity? For many financial institutions, we have a lot of legacy systems. Our technology looks a bit like the spaghetti bowl. It's a mess, different systems, old systems trying to interact together. Is this something with our legacy systems we can actually deal with? Should we have the dilemma of will you go with our legacy systems or we set up a new entity completely from scratch? But I can tell you at a minimum, is this something we have to be more educated, be more aware, having sessions like this, where we actually be aware of actually some of these new changes going on in the market? You know, are we aware of what's happening? What are some of these technological changes coming in, and what is actually coming ahead, and how can we be ready for it? But also, probably, frankly, the most important thing is, are we really ready for real transformation? If COVID is providing these challenges, but there's all these different opportunities for the industry, am I ready as a business to actually be ready to innovate? The big problem we saw for the last couple of years for a lot of financial institutions, innovation was frankly marketing. It was great. We all did a little marketing projects. It looked good for press releases. It looked good for the media. It looked good when students came to visit our bank or our brokerage. But actually, are we ready for real transformation? Are we ready to encourage failures? Are we ready to promote people who have tried projects who have failed, but because they were trying to actually embrace these new technological changes going on? And the single most important thing as well is, are we as leaders leading by example? I always give the example of one of the banks here in Asia where the CEO told its staff, that you do not work at a bank anymore, where you work at a technology firm. And if you're not ready to change yourself, the door is there and you can leave. But how we can actually lead by example in some of these changes, not only understanding them, embracing them, but also trying to lead by example from that perspective. So I'll stop here again. I know there was a lot of challenges. There's a lot of problems with COVID. But hopefully, what I want to share with you all today, that there's actually a lot of opportunities are coming up. Some of them are far away, maybe. Some of them are closer than we think. But at least these changes are here, and we need to be aware of them. It was a pleasure being with you all this morning, with sharing with you all. You can always, for those of you who want to learn more, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I have my weekly shows on 60 seconds where I summarize what's happening. I have my weekly newsletter on Saturdays as well, on LinkedIn as well. So it was a pleasure being with you all and sharing our passion of the future of money. Thank you very much, everybody. And Karen, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry, for this great conference. Les recuerdo a todas las personas conectadas interactuar con el hashtag FORO Asobolsa BBC 2020 a través de sus redes sociales y contarnos dónde se encuentran sintonizando el evento. Y ahora, para moderar el panel de preguntas, invitamos a Germán Cristancho, gerente de Investigaciones Económicas y Estrategia de la Vivienda Corredores, y Felipe Campos, gerente de Investigaciones de Alianza Valores. Pero antes de continuar con ellos, recuerden, por favor, además enviar sus preguntas en español o en inglés a través de este chat para que sean respondidas por el conferencista. Welcome to the Q&A section.
Henry, thank you very much for your presentation. It has been very interesting and revealing what is happening in the world and in China. And I would like to start the Q&A session with a broad question regarding Colombia. And it's because Colombia, even though has the third largest fintech ecosystem of the region, of the LATAM region, has a very high use of physical cash because we have financial transactions tax, because we have a high level of informality in the economy. So how do you think this digital currencies or digital transformation would land in Colombia, on Colombia, or how these changes would happen in a country like this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for your question. Yeah, this is a question that we get a lot, and I think it's very important to think about the local particularities, right? As you mentioned, right now in Colombia, we have a very high level of cash usage for the various reasons that you mentioned. And I would argue this is why it works. It's actually, we are seeing increased interest around the world. By the way, many of the countries around the world that have cash-based economies, that's where often we're seeing a lot more interest from policymakers in exploring the topic of digital assets. For a couple of reasons we just mentioned, right? One of them is, as you mentioned, people are using cash to avoid financial tax transactions and basically be under the radar, let's put it that way. With, let's say, like a central bank digital currency, it will allow policymakers to see the economic activity in the country, but also from a fiscal policy perspective, allows you to have better visibility as well. And this is why actually I think we're going to have a big debate as societies over the next couple of years on this whole debate between the importance of government policy on implementing these digital currencies, and then data privacy and the right to everybody's privacy. For example, today, let's take a country like China. China is right now de facto cashless. By the way, China was a very, very cash-heavy country only 10 years ago. The digital transformation happened very, very quickly there. One of the reasons you may argue that the Chinese central bank wants to have this digital currency is they can see the transactions going on in the country. You know, but the question is, because of this, they actually will be able to avoid these corruption, money laundering, and actually the fiscal evasion. If we do this in many other countries, will there be a backlash from the people, right? I think we'll have a debate on the right of private privacy versus the public good of being able to control some of these, what's happening in the economy. But I think that's one of the big elements I think we'll see. Frankly, what I think the era of a central bank digital currency, it's here to stay. I think COVID really catalyzed it. The big question is how quickly it's going to come into play. Yes, China may be years ahead of everybody else, but we're seeing a lot of activity around the world. The one development I think we have to watch, especially in a country like Colombia and others, is what happens with stablecoins. Like I mentioned before, especially in the case of remittances, especially if people sending money in other countries. As we know in Colombia, some of the neighboring countries where there is some real financial instability, where actually there's even more usage right now of digital currencies. What is actually usage of stablecoins? And I think that's one thing to watch, because the more efforts from policymakers to put in place a central bank digital currency. And that applies to Colombia, applies to the rest of Latin America and the world.
Okay, thank you.
Understand anything else from that point? Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Asobolsa and the BBC for bringing the change in the next decade. But today we are placing this elephant on the table and we are trying to domesticate it. I think it's the best thing to tackle it. And also, I'd like to thank Henri, because this is the first question I have is for the four subjects that you were talking about, or CBDC, are the most likely to happen like very fast, and it could bring efficiency to the measures. We have this big quantitative easing, and it's not getting to the public because it is stopping in the balance of the banks. It has two parts. Do you think we are close to the end of the dollar primacy? I know it's very hard, but I think everything is pointed that way. And do you think that a digital dollar maybe is an intermediate step to welcome officially?
Yeah, excellent. Two excellent questions. Let me tackle them one by one. The first one is on the U.S. dollar supremacy. I think Trump and Biden and the whole debate with China. I think there's a couple of things to understand. One of them is that even when you look at some of these innovations, like for example, you mentioned stable coins and central bank digital currencies. Even today, when you look at stable coins, 95% of stable coins today are US dollar denominated. What I mean by that is actually it's backed digital assets, but it's backed one-to-one. The asset that is backing it is actually US dollar. So ironically, what has happened with stable coins, it kind of make the horse faster because now actually you're able to transact US dollars around the world using stable coins without the headaches that you have with the traditional banking system, but it's still in a US dollar denominated. What I meant, the new digital Chinese central bank money is going to come to go against the US dollar. I think we have to clarify a couple of points. As part of the monetary base of China, there's still the same capital controls, and it's again this can only be used within the boundaries, if you want, of China. There's right now no stated goals of having this currency, the Chinese currency, being used overseas. Many would say, as you know, one of the big goals of the Chinese government today is this One Belt, One Road initiative. It's 65 countries. That digital yuan may be used in all this different suite of 65 countries. I'm sure many of these countries would rather use the Chinese digital yuan than using US dollars for various reasons. So I think that's one of the things to note from that perspective. We're still getting very, very far from the dollar being replaced when it comes to this, when it comes to that perspective. Your second question, which is on the CBDC element, I just forgot what was the second question. Sorry, on the.
If you have a digital dollar, maybe.
Oh yeah, dollar. Sorry.
Yeah.
Correct. The digital is an intermediary state. It's been very interesting because actually the Federal Reserve in the United States was actually quite late to this topic. There was a lot of academic discussions being done, various conversations in the U.S. But I have to say, many Western countries, frankly. However, there was actually a lot of private initiatives that came in the U.S. Probably the biggest one right now is an initiative called the Digital Dollar. That is an initiative that is led by the former CFTC chairman, Chris Giancarlo. A great initiative, by the way, where they're trying to promote the use of a digital dollar. And the whole argument that is being made there is exactly what you mentioned. Is actually, if we want the US dollar to remain the leading currency in the world, we need to make sure that we provide it with a new infrastructure that is adapted to the new realities the world needs. And this is some of the efforts that the Digital Dollar Initiative is trying to do. Now, if I think those initiatives move fast enough, I think that will definitely help the US from that perspective in kind of preserving the state that we're in right now with the US dollar being dominant. But I think it's going to be very interesting how this evolves over the next couple of months. For example, Jerome Powell gave a big speech 2 days ago with the IMF and other central bankers around the world, saying that this is something that the U.S. Fed is looking at right now. So I think this is why this topic will become something to watch over the next couple of months. Again, I can guarantee you this would have never happened. We would never be discussing this today at this session this morning, unless two things happened. One was Libra 2019, and second was COVID. I guarantee you this topic would not happen, and these conversations really catalyzed on top of the agenda for not only policymakers and regulators, but also for a lot of financial institutions as well.
Henry, I would like to ask you about macroeconomic effects or impacts, and I have maybe two questions. And one is regarding what you say in stablecoins, because you said stablecoins have a fixed value. The value of the stablecoin today is going to be the same value of that stablecoin tomorrow. So my question is regarding inflation, because this could be something similar or related to the currency pegs that emerging markets had in the 90s. So how is the value of the money in that stablecoin is going to question, just listening to you, is that when I see your presentation, you talk about a lot of digital currencies and crypto assets and stable coins and CBDCs, and the common factor is digital money, digital currencies. But do you think the end it would be from those many horses running to win, it would be 1, 2, or 3 clear winners in the digital currency world?
Yeah. Once again, Roman, excellent questions, spot on. Let me tackle your second question first. There is a risk, and this is one thing that is being very discussed, is, okay, what is going to happen, let's say in 10, 20 years? Are we going to have every country have a CBDC? Or actually there will be a gap and you'll have a couple of CBDC currencies that everybody will be using? And that is the big debate going on right now. I'll give you a very simple example is Libra. So Libra Association in their latest white paper that came out in April, we have built the infrastructure. If there is a risk that if Libra initially will launch, according to the documents they published, we launch with 5 currencies. Initially it's US dollar, Euro, Libra GBP, Great British Pound, Japanese yen, and Singapore dollar. There is a risk of currency, so actually they invite central banks, they invite countries and say, hey, we have the infrastructure, do you want to come put your own currency in this ecosystem that anybody uses Facebook then, or actually using a wallet, can actually be able to interact with it. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens at this level. One thing I would say is that I'm very impressed, but what I've been seeing in the last 12 months at the global level and from policymakers around the world. I think 2-3 years ago, regulators never got the credit they deserve for the attention they spent in this space. And right now, actually, central bankers are not getting the credit they deserve for the attention they're spending in the space as well. For example, the Bank for International Settlements, frankly, was not really the most innovative organization. Now they're actually doing pretty interesting stuff when it comes to this topic. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens in this situation. With regards to, and the same thing applies to stablecoins, your first question as well, because today it's being mainly used as trade. Really, the main reason it's being used is actually, there's 2 use cases. Some people are using it when they're trading digital assets. So people are just trading assets. It gives them a way to keep their assets in a stable venue until they go in and out to the crypto world, the crypto assets. Second is being used, for cross-border payments. Today, actually, Tether, which is a cross-border level, because it's so much cheaper and easier. The one thing I would say that I'm also seeing the age gap difference as well. I often tell this to my audiences. If you're wondering these things, how crazy they are, next time you're at a family dinner, ask the youngest member in your family what he thinks about Bitcoin and digital assets. You'll be surprised at their answer. I find often the most educated people I have on this topic are my students. And even at my job, the most educated people on this are the youngest people that we have. And there's a really comfort. It's a bit like fintech we had a couple of years ago. There's actually, I think, a generational issue as well. A lot of younger people become more comfortable on this kind of new future of money and digital assets as well.
Henry, I'm going to change the subject 180 degrees. I want to talk about inequality. And I was wondering is it possible that fintech is nurturing inequality around the world? We already saw the last 10 years, for example, if you see the equity stagnation in the markets, if you don't offer technology, your market doesn't go anywhere. It happens in Colombia, but it happens everywhere. And in terms of income distribution, Colombia went back 20 years, but if you see United States, they went back 100 years in terms of income distribution. So do you think that fintech could make a more or less?
What we've seen the last couple of months, I mean, we saw how even like you mentioned before, quantitative easing didn't actually make it to the public. There's been actually those with assets just got wealthier. And this is a problem we see around the world. And eventually, it's not only in Colombia, in a country like even the United States, so let's just use the US, I think it's a good example, only 45% of the population even own stocks, right? So again, we're talking about the one country everybody thinks is very advanced and so on and so forth, but you have, again, the massive gap. The big issue when it comes is exactly income distribution, but frankly, inequality. I really believe that fintech, let's say more broadly, gives us, for the first time, a very good chance at fighting broader financial inclusion and broader inequality. I mean, for example, financial inclusion is a good example. The last couple of years, we made tremendous progress when it comes to broader financial inclusion, especially in many emerging markets with the unbanked and so on and so forth. However, I think we're not still there being able to catalyze it. A great example is, I think, financial health. I think the big question we need to ask ourselves with banks and financial institutions is, are we actually leveraging fintech in actually when we look at the financial health element of people? For example, I may go to the gym for my physical health, I may pray for my spiritual health, but am I using fintech for my financial health? And actually, this is one thing I've been happy to see the last couple of months. We are seeing now some better tools out there, people to monitor their expenses, knowing exactly what they're doing, and being able to actually be able to see what they should be able to do with their money. And there's some solutions coming in the market. I firmly believe that digital assets will really make it even easier in many regards. First of all, because we have better analytics, we have better traceability, you can run even better models on it, and so on and so forth. Not only at the individual level, but also at the policy-making level as well. Comes back to the point that we had before. If, as a policymaker, I'm able to see the economic activity in my country, I'm able to reduce the black economy, I'm able to reduce the cash usage in the economy, it gives me actually more control and kind of be able to better serve the public and the broader economy on that perspective. So I'm quite optimistic. I unfortunately think things are moving slower than I hoped, but I think at least they're moving in the right direction.
Henry, I would like to ask about the implications for monetary policy and the challenges for central banks, because this, when you see this digital currency adoption, maybe you can think in a phenomenon similar to the dollarization, for example, in the Latin American or the Central American economies. So you lose your power of managing your money and the offer of money that your economy has. So what do you think are the main challenges for central bankers in adopting this type of digital currencies? And also, if you see, for example, I think maybe it was in Brazil that Libra tried to start operations, or maybe Facebook started or tried to make some payments through WhatsApp or something like that, and they immediately blocked the operation. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, great question once again. I think dollarization is obviously a massive problem, not only in Latin America, but also in many parts of the world. I mean, I'll give you a very good example. Some central banks actually are trying to use digital assets in a way to kind of protect themselves from dollarization. I'll give you a very simple example, Cambodia. You know, a small country, nobody talks about Cambodia, but right now they have a project called Project Bakong, you know, Bakong, that is actually one of the most interesting projects that I like. And what they're trying to fight there is the fact that actually the entire big part of their economy, people are using dollars in Cambodia. So they're like, okay, well, is there a way we can issue our own central bank digital currency that actually people can use? It's easier, faster, cheaper, that will kind of help us fight this challenge that we're seeing today. So I think that's one of the great examples that we are seeing from that perspective. However, I think that one of the bigger risks that we have is currency substitution, is the risk that we have it becomes easier to use some of these big currencies, and that negatively affects some of the local currencies in many markets. But it brings the other problem, which is how, as a central bank platform, if there's a couple bugs, we can fix it. We can do a software update. You know, as long as we're shipping the software, we can always fix these problems. As we all know, money needs to work at all times. The monetary system cannot have a bug, cannot stop for a day or two, you know? So I think that's what I think we're seeing from that perspective. The challenge is extremely, extremely high. This is why a lot of central banks are approaching it in phases. So I think for many of them, what you're seeing is they're launching as in parallel. So actually they're seeing the CBDC as a kind of a backup to the existing payment systems. And I think, frankly, both of them will operate in countries that launch it. They operate together for some time for the foreseeable future. I always give the examples in the same way that we may have emails, but we still have the post office. And we're not closing down the post offices just because we have discovered email, even though it's been 20, 30 years already, right? I think that's one of the points I think to note from that perspective when it comes to kind of the usage of it. The other thing I think the big challenge for banks, for all the financial institutions listening, you know, as CBDC, the technological investment that you will need to do, the new rails that you need to have to cater to this is actually can be quite substantial as well. So I think there's a lot of questions to be asked, not only from central banks, but also from bank and brokerage CEOs as well.
Okay, we are about to finish. I think we have two more questions. And I wanted to ask you, I wanted to go back to the stable coins. And I wonder if maybe you have seen in all the markets you are currently following, if there is an attempt to make a stable coin from an emergency market. We know that our currencies are not fashionable now. It's been like 10 years losing value. But I remember that before that, we were very strong, like until 2010. So do you think that we could be a part of a stablecoin landscape, the maybe Brazilian real or something similar to that currency?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, there's been numerous attempts in many emerging countries, including Latin America. You mentioned the Brazilian real and others who have tried to actually do a stable coin in that currency. It actually, there's nothing technologically, nothing stops you from doing it right now, for sure. It's possible. The technology is there. It's actually quite easy. There's been always two challenges that have come, and this is generally obviously the liquidity. You know how much velocity and how much liquidity there is, and second has been a lot of policymakers. So unfortunately, in many countries where these efforts were being tried, there was some pushback from policymakers in certain instances. I think this is why, and also, frankly, what was happening at the same time, the stablecoin usage of US dollars skyrocketed so quickly that you have so many even regulated versions that actually many people were simply using the US dollar version of it. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Today, if you try to buy digital assets, around the world, I know a lot of them are actually are using US dollar-based stable coins for the trading pairs that you're seeing. So I think there's good opportunities. I think for a lot of countries, it's worth the experiment, because if you're able to make things more effective, more efficient, this allows you to actually kind of jump ahead when it comes to some of the potential risks that we're all aware that you mentioned right now that we are seeing in the market.
Well, Henri, before closing, I want to thank you again for your presentation, and also tell you that the change in Colombia is also starting. I mean, has already started, because just recently The Colombian government, for example, just revealed a public initiative that it maybe is going to become law in Colombia. That is the Payments and Capital Markets Law, and is focused on concepts like open banking, like digital payments, and creating, for example, a sandbox for improving or promoting the creation of startups and fintechs and all of that. So I think we're walking to that world of the digital transformation. But my question is, what do you think it will be the role of financial institutions, and taking into account, for example, banks? What do you think it would be the role of banks, or is the role of banks right now in China? And also, what are the opportunities in this business and in the asset management industry?
Absolutely. No, first of all, that's what I think. There's a lot of great developments going on in Colombia, like you mentioned right now, which I think I'm very, very excited. I've been obviously following some of the developments going on in Colombia quite closely. I think there's a lot of exciting things going on. The thing that's going to be very interesting now for the market participants to look at it. So, for example, if you're a bank, okay, what is the opportunities that this provides to me? Are there challenges? Are there opportunities? You mentioned asset management, for example. One thing we're realizing right now around the world is a lot of individuals are interested in getting access to these new digital currencies, but in a way that is packaged for them in an asset management format. So instead of them buying Bitcoin, they just buy a regular fund the way they always buy funds, and they get the economic exposure to some of these underlying currencies like you mentioned. So I think that's one of the things to look at from that perspective. When it comes to the role of banks, I think, all these changes that I mentioned, banks are not going to disappear. They're still going to be there. However, it's going to be, what is the role that the banks will play in this ecosystem? I think, and that's what I think is going to really matter on, for example, the stable coin activity. If the banks do not change, they will be completely left out of this whole stable coin activity that is taking place on payments. It's a pretty big business, the cross-border payments, when it comes to import, export, and others, for example, and the role that they're playing. Central bank digital currencies, right? The central bank has a very clear option. They can either deliver themselves to the public, or they do it via traditional banks. So I think but this only can happen when the banks understand the topic, they're willing to work with the central banks, and they're ready to actually innovate themselves to enable some kind of this new form of money that is coming in. So again, all this together put in, I reiterate at the beginning of my presentation, I really believe this is the most exciting period in the history of finance and in history of money. Our kids and our grandchildren will look back at the period we're in right now and say, wow, this was such a crazy moment that so many changes happened. How it's funny how this, geopolitical situation, COVID, they're going to read about this in a couple of years. And we, all of us, everybody who's listening to this webinar, we are in a very privileged position that we're able to actually shape the future of money. And I think that's super exciting. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think we're very lucky as a generation that we're going to be able to witness these changes. And I think that's very, very exciting.
Henri, sorry, we have a bonus track. Somebody is very worried that you are going to leave, so we have a very, very last question, and it's very quick. Do you know is there any jurisdiction where a clearinghouse is managing the collateral for a stablecoin ecosystem?
Yeah, a good question. So on the clearinghouses, let's say on the stablecoin mechanism, maybe it's better I just explain how it works behind the scenes. So what you're seeing in many countries right now is there is a stablecoin issuer, but actually the stablecoin is actually custodied with a lot of traditional financial institutions. So Libra, for example, let's give an example that we discussed today. Libra has made it very clear they are looking for partners. They are looking for regulated partners, custodians, brokers who can custody their assets for them. I think it's no surprise that you have seen a lot of the big custodians and financial institutions try to play in this ecosystem by being part of that. So I think that's one thing I think to note is a lot of traditional financial institutions will play a role from that perspective. What I think it becomes interesting now is when it comes to how the whole, let's call the FX environment will happen behind the scenes between these different stable coins that you're seeing in the market. Believe it or not, a lot of it happens right now via the brokerages. It happens via OTC crypto brokerages right now. A lot of it is happening via some of these exchanges that you are seeing. And there's actually quite now a lot of activity in this front as well. But I think for a lot of the players you're seeing, some of the countries are actually looking at this very actively from an infrastructure perspective. You have a lot of activity right now going on in Switzerland, for example. The regulators have been trying to put in place the infrastructure for this. In some of the other places that you're seeing a bit of activity on it, obviously places like Hong Kong and Singapore. You're seeing some of the smaller countries right now, Gibraltar, Malta, try to put regulations around this. But when it comes to the broader stablecoin environment, whole clearing, the whole back end, we're still at the very early stages. Again, there's only $20 billion of assets right now in the market. It's nothing. I mean, if you look at the number of FX traded during a day, that's nothing. It's 5 minutes of FX trading in a day. But that's what I'm saying. This is taking place. And this is, I think, for a lot of players, gives the opportunity to see if it's worth exploring, and if it is, what actions they could take forward.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Henry, for sharing all this knowledge with us. It has been great, and I really hope, as you said, I really hope to see you again very soon, and probably here in Colombia, and we are welcoming you as many times as you want.
Muchas gracias. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody, for letting us share our passion of the future of money. I look forward to being with you all soon, hopefully in person. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Henry, Germán y Felipe, por este panel tan interesante. Agradecemos a todas las personas que se conectaron a este foro 2020 Asobolsa BBC, a nuestro speaker, Henri Arslanian, y a nuestros aliados Alianza y Da Vivienda Corredores. Y por supuesto, a nuestro patrocinador Credit Corp Capital, que hicieron posible el desarrollo de este evento. Que pasen una muy buena tarde, y para despedirnos los dejamos con un video que muestra el valor de estar conectados.
Hoy más que nunca, nos adaptamos a los cambios que estamos viviendo y que nos llenan de valor para superar los momentos difíciles que estamos enfrentando. Reconocemos la importancia de estar unidos para seguir siendo la fuente de financiación de las empresas del país. Seguimos con la esperanza firme, demostrando nuestro apoyo a la industria y al mercado, trabajando por el futuro de la economía, de Colombia y de nuestra gente. Bolsa de Valores de Colombia. Conectados, nuestro valor es más grande.